We often approach the Bible as a source of comfort, a collection of ancient stories meant to soothe the weary soul. But there are chapters that offer no comfort. There are narratives that read more like a cold, clinical transcript from a historical nightmare. Welcome to the Siege of Samaria. The year is approximately 841 BC. The Aramean army, led by King Ben-Hadad, has done more than just attack the capital of Israel. They have completely strangled it. In the ancient world, a siege was not a battle of courage or swords. It was a brutal battle of time. It was a heartless bet that a city would eventually consume itself before the stone walls ever gave way. But it is the sheer, brutal economy of this collapse that hits the hardest. When a city is cut off from the world, money does not disappear, it simply loses its mind. The biblical record states that a donkey's head, an animal deemed unclean and virtually inedible by law, was selling for 80 pieces of silver. Imagine that transaction. Imagine the hollow eyes of a father paying a fortune for the literal scraps of an animal he was forbidden to touch. And then there is the mystery of the dove's dung. Whether this was a rare seed or literal waste, the price was 5 pieces of silver for a mere handful. This is the ultimate cost of a fallen system. When the supply lines are severed, the value of human life drops to the price of waste. The clock is ticking, and in Samaria, the cost of survival is about to become a debt that no one can afford to pay. As the famine deepened, the economic collapse gave way to a total moral rot. The systems of law and order were no longer governing the city. Instead, it was the raw, primal instinct of hunger. Every shadow in the street became a threat, and every neighbor became a competitor for the last breath of life. King Joram, the son of Ahab, walks the high ramparts of the city, looking down at his starving people. Perhaps he was looking for a military solution, or perhaps he was waiting for a sign of surrender. But instead, he is approached by a woman who is not asking for bread, but for a legal ruling. This is the peak of the Controverse. She explains to the king that she and another woman had reached a horrific agreement. They had made a pact of survival that is almost too dark to speak aloud. She tells the king, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.'" The text remains chillingly clinical in its description. They boiled the child, they ate, but when the second day arrived, the other woman had hidden her son. The betrayal within the horror is what finally breaks the king. He realized that the city hadn't just lost its food, it had lost its humanity. In a fit of grief and rage, the king tears his royal robes, revealing the rough, scratching sackcloth of mourning against his skin. It was a public display of penance, but beneath the sackcloth, his heart was hardening. He wasn't mourning the sins of the nation, he was mourning his own loss of control. But notice carefully the condition of his heart. He does not turn to God in repentance. He does not weep for the spiritual decay that led his nation to this moment of absolute depravity. Instead, he looks for someone to blame. He looks for a scapegoat. In a moment of blind rage, he points his finger at the prophet Elisha, vowing that the man of God would not keep his head by the end of the day. And while the king's executioner is on his way, Elisha is sitting calmly in a house with the elders of Israel. He is not panicking, he is not afraid, he is tuned into a frequency that the king cannot hear. He knows the blade is coming, but he also knows the king's power is an illusion compared to the one he serves. He tells the elders that a son of a murderer has sent someone to behead him. But before the blade can even reach the door, Elisha releases a prophecy that sounds like absolute madness to a starving population. He stands amidst the hunger and speaks a future that no one else can see. He declares, "By this time tomorrow, a measure of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." Think about that. In 24 hours, the economy of death was predicted to become an economy of overflow. Consider the weight of that statement. People are currently eating their own children to survive, and Elisha is predicting a total economic restoration within a single day. He is predicting that the most expensive commodities will suddenly become common, and that the gates of the city will swing open to abundance. Standing next to the king was a high-ranking royal officer, a man who relied on logic and military might. He mocked the prophet, saying, "Even if the Lord made windows in heaven, could this happen?" It was the ultimate expression of human skepticism, a refusal to believe that God can work outside the bounds of human crisis. Elisha's response is a terrifying sentence that should haunt every skeptic. He looks the man in the eye and says, "You will see it with your eyes, but you will not eat of it." In this moment, the prophecy creates a divide. For some, tomorrow would bring life. For this man, tomorrow would bring the ultimate regret. How does a silent God answer a city that has lost its soul? He does not send a legion of angels with flaming swords. He does not split the earth open. Instead, he uses the psychology of fear. He uses the very darkness that the enemy relied on to turn the tide of the war. As night fell over the Aramean camp, the Lord caused the enemy soldiers to hear a sound. It was the low, rhythmic thundering of a massive army, the terrifying roar of thousands of horses, and the metallic clatter of endless chariots. The Arameans were gripped by a supernatural panic, hearing a force that didn't exist in the physical realm. They believed the king of Israel had hired the Hittites and the Egyptians to crush them. In their terror, they abandoned everything. They left their horses tied, their tents standing, and their warm meals sitting on the tables. They fled for their lives into the darkness, leaving a fortune behind in the dust. And who were the first to find this miracle? It wasn't the king's scouts or the mighty warriors of Israel. It was 4 lepers, 4 men who had been cast out of society, left to die outside the city gates because they were deemed unclean. The very people society ignored were the first to witness the salvation of the nation. Their logic was simple and profound. They asked, "Why sit here until we die?" They had nothing left to lose, so they walked into the enemy camp expecting a sword, but instead they found a feast. They stepped out of their death sentence and into a treasure trove of gold, silver, and food. They ate until they were full, they hid gold and silver, and then they realized their silence was a sin. They said, "This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves." They realized that their blessing was meant to be the city's rescue. They returned to the city that had rejected them to bring the news of salvation. By the time the sun rose over the gates of Samaria, the prophecy of Elisha was being fulfilled. The news spread like wildfire through the starving streets, turning despair into a desperate rush for life. The famine was broken, the food was abundant, and the royal officer who mocked God was stationed at the gate to control the crowd. But the hunger of the people was too great. He was trampled to death in the surge of the crowd. He saw the bread, just as Elisha said, but he died before he could ever taste the victory. The outcasts became the messengers, and the impossible became history. The Siege of Samaria is more than a story of ancient warfare. It is a mirror. It shows us how quickly a civilization can collapse when it abandons its spiritual foundation. But it also shows us that even when we are at our darkest point, the breakthrough is often waiting just outside the gates, carried by the people we least expect. God doesn't always use the powerful. He often uses the broken to shame the wise. As you look at the challenges in your own life, ask yourself, are you looking at the closed windows of heaven, or are you ready to walk through the open doors? History is full of sieges, but it is also full of unexpected rescues. This is Controverse. If you're ready to look past the surface and find the dangerous truths hidden in history, hit subscribe. The truth is always deeper than it looks. We'll see you in the next investigation.